Now, it's been more than 10 years since Nigeria passed a law banning child labor, but the International Labour Organization says there are 15 million children working there. In the final part of our series looking at child labor around the world, Ahmed Idris went to meet some of them in Nigeria.
11-year-old Osama Muhammad is one of millions of Nigerian children forced to work in conditions like this. He dropped out of school when he was 8 to join the ever-growing number of people working in mines across Nigeria. For him, the pay justifies the pain.
With the little I earn here, I support my family and take care of my own needs. Yes, it is hard work, but what options do I have? I'm happy with what I do.
Osama says his parents are happy with him working, but admits he'd rather be in school with his mates. With support from a local musician, Osama and others brush aside the potential dangers of this work. They dig for gold in tunnels hundreds of meters below the surface with no protective equipment. Some have been killed or injured.
This is the side where Muhammad Osama and his fellow laborers come to regularly to earn less than $1 a day. Like thousands of poor, unskilled miners, this back-breaking job is the only viable option of getting food for their families. Yet despite the dangers, they feel lucky to be here.
The stones dug by Osama and others are brought here to be crushed. Then the extraction process begins. These are the dealers who fund most of the operation, which means they make most of the profit. They reject the idea that using children like Osama is exploitation.
We offer them an opportunity of a lifetime. Most of the people here are from poor families. They can hardly afford 3 meals a day, but these young men can support themselves and their families. They are better off than the educated.
Back at the mine, Osama's focus now is to make money and probably be a dealer himself. There are millions like him in Nigeria who are out of school and out of luck at the moment. And unless the government finds a way of stopping their exploitation, millions more will never know the joy of childhood. Ahmed Idris, Al Jazeera, and Company.
While Kunle Onabolu is the director of the African Child Trust in London, he is also a specialist in international development and poverty eradication in Africa. Joins us now live to further talk about child labor in Africa. Children have always worked in Nigeria, sadly, we know this, but the figures, according to UNICEF, have significantly increased over the years. Why is that, do you think? What are the factors that have contributed to this rise?
I suppose, thank you. I suppose the overarching problem is the issue of poverty. I think a lot of people, when they think of Nigeria, they think of the oil and they think of the wealth that is more in itself a veneer below which is a significant amount of poverty. And I think that some of the problems that your reporters highlighted are the issues that come to the surface when you peel over the veneer.
Right, but there is legislation to protect children. The Nigerian government has adopted ILO conventions. Why is the legislation not being enforced? What's preventing it from being enforced? Well,
as you very well know, it's one thing to have the legislation written down in the tenets or on paper. It's another thing to police and enforce it. Now, if you look at it, from that dimension, then you will recognize that the institutions that are supposed to provide the policing of these regulations are not themselves trained or able to do so, or even resourced to do just that. But then the reality on the ground is that there are people who are in abject poverty who would look for any means for survival. And I think that's really what we're saying. You see, it's a problem that has been ongoing for many years. And while the Children's Rights Law, which was passed in 2003, really does help because it establishes the government has an intent.
Right.
The reality is that if things do not improve at the ground level, at the domain level, then you will continue to have these problems.
What precisely
as
then should be done? What precisely should be done at the ground level to prevent children from being dragged into child labor?
I think the key issues are the government needs to redirect its focus into the issues that surround poverty. And those issues are, in my view, that of education, that of providing social infrastructure that will help the very, very poor in the community move out of the poverty level that holds them down. I mean, let me just give you some very, very, very simple example. A woman who has been widowed, lost her husband, the breadwinner, in a very rural community. She has no education herself. She has 6 children to look after. There is no social security that she can run to make provisions for her. What does she do? This is the only outlet for her, really, is either if she sends those kids to go and begin to work, child labor, hawking around on the streets for things, going to work on the farms, you know, agricultural farms, as an agricultural laborer, being a domestic maid servant, getting involved in things like the mining. Or if they are fortunate, organizations like ourselves, the African Child Trust, if we're working in their community, then we will go out and reach out to help. But the underlying thing that this family need is having access to education. Now, education at primary school level, in theory, is free. But in practice, it is not. When you have to buy school uniform, when you have to pay a teacher's fee for one thing or the other, and you don't have that resource, and that resource, the little you have, is competing with having to put shelter over your head, with having to find food for these kids to eat. It's a huge challenge. So the easy way out is to get them into employment. Now, government can invest in these areas, as I said, in the educational area, perhaps look at means of or putting structures in place that will allow people to have access to work in a controlled and regulated manner.
There's certainly a great deal of underlying problems. Thank you very much, Kunle Onabolu, for sharing some of them with us. Kunle Onabolu joining us there live from London. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.